John has asked a fantastic question about time smearing, and they said that the kid you showed in this video has time smearing issues. Do void pipes have the same issue? If no, is it because the internal horn is less complex? So let me can we see it? I would like to make the screen smaller. Why it doesn't? Oh, here. Okay. So what was that kit that I mentioned? Okay, so now my screen is not as responsive. Okay, as it should be. I think I must have been referring to the Fostex cabinet for the FE103. And when you look at that, oh, is the video still running? Then what's happening here is that this is a very small cabinet, and with very small cabinets, that time smearing issue is brought up in frequency quite a bit, because the area that is smeared is in a range where or hearing is quite responsive and very uh, unforgiving for smearings in the in those frequencies where it occurs. So when we look at the void pipe, so this is my void pipe. I haven't shared this with you guys yet. So what happens to here, that time smearing is defined by the length, by the distance between the main loudspeaker, the front source, and the source of the backwave radiation, which is the port. Well, this is technically not a port, but it's the opening of the pipe, but let us call it as a port for ease of understanding. But here you see there's a meter, like 3 feet between the two of them, and that's long enough so that those frequencies which are like 500 hertz and above, where our human hearing is very sensitive, they are not really affected by this smearing. And if something smears below 100 hertz, below 200 hertz, is not as big of a problem for our perception of music, compared to something smearing in 500 hertz or more. If you have smearing in the 500 hertz region, that is pretty bad and really destructive to sound quality. And that happens with many of the ported design loudspeakers. And I would say it's not just the smearing, but the port colorations as well. So both of these. So when you add something to the 500 hertz through 3 kilohertz range, which defines basically our perception of a clear and natural sound. That's the meat of what the brain processes. If we time smear that, which means that the information we are receiving has a time delay on it. And either an entire part of the spectrum has a time delay, which is typically called as time smear, or it has elements which have a different timing compared to the main output, and that's what coming out of a port does in many cases. You have those port colorations, and in the case of port coloration, the port resonances that occur in this region, 500 hertz to 3 kilohertz region, this is not in the case of the void pipe, but in the vast majority of loudspeakers, ported loudspeakers, then you have those resonances which reach up to 1 kilohertz. They do act like similarly to what the time smear does, which means to obscure the information that you are getting in the mid-range. and that's why basically almost all ported loudspeakers they have problems with mid-range um, because they have this coloration added to the mid-range that is either time smear that's happening because the port is really close to the driver itself, and when the distance is like, let's say, like 10 inches or which is like less than a feet, like 20-30 centimeters, then that causes a time smear which brings it to this very very sensitive region. Plus you also get the port colorations added to it, and that's why you can have a really serious problems with the mid-range with that. If you do your port design properly, you can minimize that effect, but it's done to very very few loudspeakers, and it's still happening because of the time smear component. So you can minimize the port coloration by proper port design. If you're talking about a box speaker, which would be like a bookshelf speaker, which would be like this size, tiny one, but the time smear there still occurs between the port and the driver, and here we still have time smear, but the frequencies where it occurs are so low that it's not a big problem anymore, and that time smear is going to get just averaged into the time smearing that your room does to the sound, because once the sound leaves your loudspeaker and is in your room, then basically to perceive the bass, you don't perceive it through the direct radiation of the loudspeaker, because the vast majority of the bass you are hearing, it comes from the room. And it's called the Schroeder effect, that when we go lower in frequencies, so basically under 100 hertz, the majority of bass you are hearing the room, and just a negligible part of the energy comes directly from the loudspeaker. So that's why basically the time smear of the room dominates the bass response, and that's why if you have a time smear which is a long one, big enough to reach down to the bass, then it's not going to be as destructive as having a time smear for a tiny cabinet. I think this was a kind of convoluted response and I've been bouncing around, but I hope I answered the question. So thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and maybe I should drink a tea because this is my third video I made today and they are really bouncing all around. Bye bye.